Yeah, I mean, again, you get those things where it's like non-binary alien lizard shapeshifter mood.
I mean, yeah, it's like, I mean, and it's like you do feel like an alien, so why the fuck wouldn't you represent
Honestly,
me like that?
honestly, you're right. Yeah, that's a good point. Content notices for this episode include light mentions of homophobia and transphobia. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rule 63 podcast. My name is Anna Marie. My pronouns are she, her, and hers.
My name is Sandy. I use he, series, and they, series pronouns.
And today we are talking about trans representation in media, everyone's favorite topic, and always a fun one to talk about, question mark? Well, depends on what year you're talking about, really.
Yeah.
The framework for this episode will be the new Netflix documentary Disclosure, featuring Laverne Cox and a bunch of other really amazing trans actors, actresses, etc., and activists. And it's a really great film, in my opinion. Danny, what did you think of Disclosure?
It was cool.
Yeah.
It was like, I liked that I came out of a documentary about trans people feeling positive.
Yeah, right? It was
like,
so,
yeah.
Such a rare feeling. It felt
Super
nice.
It also pointed out like I'm trying to think of the word, like, I guess images of trans people that I didn't realize I saw when I was younger.
Sure.
That I was like, oh yeah, I definitely would have seen that happened.
Uh-huh.
That I was just like, I don't remember any of this until they showed it on, like, the documentary.
Yeah, I mean, the two of the biggest examples of, like, quote-unquote trans characters in media are, like, Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs and Ace Ventura. Those are, like, the two biggest examples. And many people have seen those films and, like, never consciously made the connection. But, of course, many people saw those films and were like, haha, trans people are a joke. Or maybe not in that language, but that's what they internalized.
Yeah. I remember, I didn't retain anyone's names, and so I apologize for that.
I also am bad at that, so you're so heckin' valid. Ooh.
I remember the one guy who was talking about, like, watching Ace Ventura and just having completely not realized that there was this, like, horrible shit in it. And I'm like, I feel like that's part of the problem, is that people, like, have these, like, weird little locked-in memories that they don't realize are influencing how they're interacting with real trans people. Because, like, I feel like there's a lot of people who are in this weird space where, like, they don't really have some problem with actual real trans people, but there's, like, a connection between those two things that they aren't consciously making.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a huge problem. I think it's, like, one of the major problems. Like, in my mind, a huge problem with, like, how cis people interact with trans people is, like, and maybe I'm not articulating this in the best way, but, like, they know how to say the right things to your face, but they don't actually have a conceptualization of, like, the real issues that trans people go through.
And they might even want to be good.
Oh, yeah.
And not just be, like, trying to, like, not cause problems or whatever. Like, even people who genuinely, like, are like, yeah, I don't want to cause these people problems.
Uh-huh.
I think a lot of people, like, don't get that, like, the man in a dress joke is transphobic.
Oh, yeah.
Which is weird.
Totally.
Because I'm like, naturally. But people just... obviously some people are just transphobic, but I think a lot of people just, like, are like, haha, laugh at that, and aren't, like, realizing what they're laughing at.
Sure, yeah. I mean, just to, like, break it down, it's like, what is funny? It's similar to, like, how you, like, a good strategy to deconstruct any, like, racist or homophobic or shitty joke. It's just like, why are you laughing at that? Please explain it to me. I don't get it. Like, explain to me why a man in a dress is funny. And they have to be like, oh, well, they're not supposed to. What do you mean? Why? Explain it to me.
I don't get
it. Why can't a man wear a dress? The world would be a lot better if men could just wear dresses, I think. Yeah. But anyway.
I think.
This film. What was, like... I have some, like, general discussion questions, because I actually brought up this film in, like, book club type setting. Like, I forced people to watch this movie, basically. Is what I'm trying to say. So, you mentioned that you've seen... I don't know where I'm going with this.
So one thing in the movie that was, like, really interesting in how they handled it, just because it's, like, wasn't necessarily what my first instinct would be, was, like, how they talked about the like, Jerry Springer and associated things, because there were a couple moments where people were like, that was good for me.
Yeah, totally.
To some extent, because it made me aware that these people existed, even if they were sensationalized. And one of the women made the point that, like, these people probably knew what they were getting into and were getting their money and also getting a chance to, like, say, obviously in a really shitty power position, but getting the chance to, like, say, hello, this is real, this is people that exist.
Yeah. So this is...
That was really fascinating.
Yeah, it's so interesting looking back in time, and, like, even just thinking about how, like, 20 years ago we didn't have all, like, the language we have today to describe trans and gender nonconforming people, and thinking about what people at that time had to go through. Obviously, I think this is, like, maybe not a great way to position this or frame this, but maybe perhaps, like, young trans people don't really get that back in the 90s, even though we would look back at that and say, like, wow, how dare they represent the trans community this way. It's like, that was the first contact for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so it may not have been perfect, but it was
people taking advantage of what they had access to.
Yeah, I mean, like, giving trans people a platform in, like, the 80s and 90s, holy shit.
Yeah. And it's super weird, because as soon as, like, they started talking about that, I'm like, I remember, like, being homesick or whatever and, like, flipping through channels, and I obviously did not give a shit about those shows, but if I, like, was flipping through and there were trans people on it, I would stop and watch, and didn't, like, ever think about that in any way, and I'm like, question mark.
Wonder if this will awake something inside of me. Anyway, what's on Nickelodeon?
Doesn't awaken anything.
Anyway, what's on Nickelodeon?
Yeah.
And you can imagine how many other people, cis or trans, had that first contact in that way, just, like, flipping through TV without even realizing it. I think my first contact with anything, even remotely trans-related, was, like, a tabloid magazine at the grocery store. And at the front page, it's, like, something like, man gets pregnant. What?
Yep. There, in our 7th grade year, it was the pregnant man. They were talking about it.
Really?
It was, like, a whole news cycle.
It was a whole news cycle? I wasn't imagining that.
Because it was a trans guy.
Yeah, I, like, remember, I've never opened, like, a tabloid magazine, like, at the grocery aisle in my life. But I flipped that one open, and it was like, oh, it's trans man.
It was so weird, too, because everybody was like, oh, this is crazy. And I was like, whoa, pregnant dude? And then I read it, and they explained what trans people were. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like, immediately.
Yeah, it's so... it's so shocking how, like, easy and accessible it could be without, like, bad actors making it about, you know, shitty evil things, like connecting it to fucking Buffalo Bill or Ace Ventura.
Yeah. And it was so weird because it like that was in the context of this like hyper sensationalized story that what I vaguely remember about the guy, I think he was like leaning into it to make a point about trans people. But like it's so weird that it was like this hyper sensationalized story, but like, and that's how it came to me. But I like read, oh, this is what's going on. I was like, oh, okay, makes sense. Just completely not like, oh wow.
Yeah. Because it's not an issue. Men can get pregnant.
I understand how that happened.
Yeah.
Cool.
And that's the power of, like, positive versus negative trans representation, because you can have positive trans representation that is, like, accessible and maybe not easy for everyone to get, because everyone comes from different places, but you can also have trans representation that's terrible.
Yeah.
And they mentioned in the documentary, like, you know, there are some bad examples of trans people in the media, or just examples of just, like, over and over again, trans people are, like, you know, killed on screen or whatever. But, you know, that wouldn't be a problem if we had more good examples. So the goal now should just be, like, get trans people in things and let them be in charge of those things in media.
Yeah.
Put them in the writer's room.
That was one of the things I really liked, was that they made the point that, like, some of these, like, really, like, tragic trans storylines or whatever are things that, like, ought to be told. Mm-hmm. It's just that you should also then show trans people getting to be happy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And, like, not just be like, your life will be death. It will just be, like, one downhill trudgery through drugs to death.
Uh-huh.
You know?
They talk about SVU, and I remember them talking about, like, sex work in a positive way, where it's like, you know, a lot of trans people on screen are sex workers, but it's fine to be a sex worker. Obviously, it's just, like, something that comes with problems.
Yeah, and when you don't, like, contextualize why a lot of trans people are sex workers and just make it seem like
they're perverts or something.
This is what they do.
This is what trans people do, you know? Providing that context is really important, and so that is an important new avenue that can be broken, or maybe some show has broken that down, I'm not sure. Yeah. So that was really good, how they handled, like, you know, the quote-unquote prostitutes on SVU and stuff like that. Yay. Sorry, I'm just happy, you know?
Yeah. I mean, part of it was that, like, ending where they were just like, and then all of a sudden we have all these trans shows, and I'm like, we do all of a sudden have all of these shows.
Wow.
Neat.
Pose is a great example.
Yeah.
Of, like, a show that's just fun, first of all, and shows the real problems that trans people face, but not as, like, a death sentence-y kind of way, but just, like, why they live this way. I love how they contextualize it in the ballroom culture, because it's, like, in a time when that's the only way to find joy and fun if you're a trans person in the late 80s, early 90s. You know?
Yeah, and I also do like having just, like, another, like, piece of media to bring awareness of the fact of what ball culture, like, was and did.
Absolutely.
Because I think sometimes we aren't great about maintaining history.
Oh, we can do a whole
Probably
episode.
because we all die.
We can do a whole episode about LGBT history and erasure of all that. And maybe we should. Wink, wink, listeners. But, yeah, it's tragic how most people don't know about ball culture. Even, like, queer and trans people don't know about ball culture. When I first saw Paris is Burning, my life fucking changed.
Yeah.
And obviously that documentary wasn't perfect and has, like, you know, exploitation problems and stuff, which we could get into. But my world was changed. And if you want a show that's, like, the best trans representation in all of TV history, go watch Pose. Go watch Pose, especially because it features, you know, black trans people and other trans people of color.
Yeah. I also do really like that they sort of made the point to point out like the evolution in like writers writing shows and becoming better, like individuals becoming better at writing trans characters, and not just like that like we had to get rid of all of them. Like people learning
and growing. We love to see
nice.
it. You don't have to like cancel everyone. Yeah. They brought on Lily Wachowski, which was awesome.
Yeah. I think one of the things too is that that I was thinking with the development is that even if you are one of the people who is starting to talk about a group of people before it's like normalized, you're probably more likely to do it super problematically even if you're trying to be good.
Yeah.
So like some of it is just like, if you're trying to do the good thing, you're going to have like a more quote unquote cancelable history than people who just don't touch the issue.
Yeah. If you just like stick with the status quo, don't rock the boat at all, you're really putting yourself in a vulnerable position when you're trying to talk about marginalized and minoritized communities. I guess the trick there is to just talk to them and make them help you write the thing.
Yeah.
But, you know.
I definitely think it's one of those things that, like, maybe when we're turning and judging people's backlogs, we should be keeping in mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's that thing where, like, we're harsher on queer media and queer creators than, like, cishet ones. Type of thing, like how people, like, weirdly hate Steven Universe. I'm not going to do discourse, but, like, as an example.
Yeah. Oh, sure. I mean, people have, like, accused Rebecca Sugar, who is, like, a non-binary Jewish person, of being a fascist for the way she wrote certain characters in the show. And it's like, come on, people.
It's a children's show.
It's a children's show. Relax. Yeah, I mean, Steven Universe is I was about to say, I was like, it's trans representation, but like that's sort of like the queer community either projecting or whatever. I don't know where I'm going with this. Again, I mean, I'm a little sleepy today. Sorry, listeners. But I love having like children's shows that can talk about things like gender and sex and sexuality in a positive way. And they're even, I can't remember if the documentary mentioned this, but there are some like cartoons now with trans characters.
Yeah.
Which is wild.
It is. It's nuts. I'm just like, I can't imagine that.
I literally
I'm
can't
sure
even
there
imagine.
were trans characters in cartoons I watched, but they were not good.
Yeah. Oh, man. I could show you this little video essay I found of like queer and trans characters in like children's media. And there's like a couple decent examples. There was even, oh man, I should have watched this. I can bring it up next time and show you, but there was a really great video essay by a like black content creator on YouTube who talks all about like animation and stuff like that. And they went through all of this like examples of queer people in media. This is a tangent, I know, but the point is everything from like, you know, man in a dress jokes to like real examples of like, you know, alien and robot characters who like purport to not have a gender or change genders or whatever, that again we like slip through the cracks in our mind when we try to imagine queer and trans representation in children's media growing up. But yeah, it's out there. We just, you know, forget about it, or we internalize it in weird ways, just like we talked about before.
Yeah. I think that a lot of people who, I feel like a lot of like internal shame didn't necessarily come from anywhere except media. Like even if your parents weren't saying anything, or like you weren't deep in some like conservative religion or whatever, Like, I feel like just, like, there's a lot of this, and they talked about this, it's just, like, absorbed shame that you're like, oh, that is bad, even if it has not been defined as trans and you don't have the language, you have, like, you can look at it and put it together.
Yeah, I mean, like...
And I feel like sometimes that's part of why people don't come out later, is because they figure out what they shouldn't be before they've, like, put a word to what they feel.
I believe what you're talking about is, like, queer-coded villains, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic, but, you know, like, the frickin'... Who was the villain in Powerpuff Girls? This, like, yeah.
Which is, it's so funny because, like, all of the ones that are super problematic, I'm like, they are my faves, but it's just, like, gay culture.
Oh my god, yeah. All, like, the posts that are, like, all the queer-coded villains in children's media especially, I just resonated with so hard growing up.
And now I'm, like... now I'm like this.
Yeah, but the queer coding, if you didn't know, is just, like, you know, making, like, the villain characters the ones that are, like... you know, flamboyant or
sexually ambiguous
or dress in a gender non-conforming fashion just to, like, other them and to be like, see, that's the villain. They're not conforming to cis heteropatriarchy standards.
There's a lot of stuff where you'll see, like, female villains being, like, sexually arousing towards other female characters, and that's, like, will be all of the gay on the show, and it's just like, one, bisexuality is evil, two, and it's only for let's be hot about this for 5 minutes.
Yep. Yeah, it's tragic. So of course people internalize that and are like, oh, I'm not supposed to act like that. Unless you know you're a powerful gay from the get-go, and you're just like, yes, I'm in. I'm gonna be like that because it's funny or whatever.
Yeah.
Which, props to you if you were, like, out and gay and flamboyant in, like, high school or middle school. You're so powerful, and I'm proud of you. Yeah.
I'm, like, looking at my notes.
Sure, yeah, do your thing. I didn't really have that many notes. And also I watched it a little bit ago. What else was good about the show?
What else is good?
Well, we can talk about, like, what we think was lacking.
I mean, so one thing that I thought of that I wouldn't necessarily say was lacking, but I don't necessarily think they explicitly stated, was because they talked disclosure. They talked about some of the problems with those storylines that are, like, they assume that there's something to disclose. But they didn't quite talk about how those narratives are also basically always the other person freaks out.
Yeah.
Like, and I just, like, because it's, like, weird because you, like, kind of do want to, because a lot of the times the person freaking out, not always, but it's like a two sides thing. It's like that you're supposed to be sympathetic for both people, so, and it's not always just like, oh wow, look at this liar. They imploded their life by not disclosing. There's often a decent amount of sympathy when it's not just, like, played as, like, a laugh at the end. And it's also hard because it's like in terms of, this is one of those things where there's, like, things that become difficult because good writing puts you in a tricky spot, because you have not written a good conflict if like, you establish one of the characters as 100% in the right, but you also don't want to be like, yeah, this guy freaking out over this is, both sides, right?
Yep.
And so it's just like, I don't know, just like show one person being like, it's okay, I don't give a shit. I think this is the same thing. It's like, it's okay to show storylines where the person discloses and the other person freaks out, because that happens.
Yeah.
But, like, you could also show, like, them not freaking out, or just, like, make one storyline where they didn't tell anyone, and even if you don't paint the other person as evil, you paint them as clearly wrong. Because you can do that. It's possible.
It's possible. Yeah.
It's just like, I feel like they're, I don't know.
This is not like a conversation that I can like super relate to, because I'm always just like super out about my transness and, quote unquote stealthing, or like trying to keep it semi-private or have a conversation about it is not something I necessarily try to do or need to do very often. But I can think of one positive example that I saw fairly recently. This wasn't covered in the Netflix doc disclosure because this was released like earlier this year. It's a show called Work in Progress. It's a show on HBO starring Abby McEnany and Theo Germain, among other people, including Julia Sweeney, weirdly. And it's just a really fucking powerful and good and funny show about like queer people, mental illness, and Theo Germain plays a trans man. And it's just such a... you just say yes. And it's just such a good and positive show. I mean, obviously it's like a dark comedy. Like, they make joke about like mental illness and suicide constantly. But the relationship between Abby and Chris is like the trans guy, is just so like healthy and wholesome. And they just like have honest conversations about transitioning and queerness. And the main character, Abby, like, even when she doesn't like get it all the time or isn't with it all the time, she's still like nice and cool and understanding about it. And just seeing those conversations happen was transformative for me. And I'm fucking 3 years into my transition, but I still haven't seen a conversation where it's like, these are my pronouns, like, this is why you don't want to know my dead name, blah, blah, blah. Like, in a positive way, and then have it be like normal on screen.
Where it's not just like this big reveal where they found you out and now you have to explain yourself.
It's like the plot of an episode,
Or this like teary-eyed confession thing, which is also so unpleasant to watch.
It is it isn't fun to watch. Like,
I'm also like, do people do this? Because pretty unrelatable
to me.
Maybe I'm just like not in that position.
I mean, surely there are trans people, whether they're like super dysphoric or not, that are like trying to keep it relatively secret or are embarrassed. But I'm not fucking embarrassed. I'm full of pride. I wave pride flags around at protests almost every week. I'm out here.
This isn't like,
I'm not gonna
shitting on people who are more uncomfortable.
I know. I would never ever like judge someone for feeling that way. And maybe it is good for them. Again, maybe it's good for them to see that on the screen. But I'm definitely looking for more in my trans content, and I'm glad that it's starting to come to exist.
This is another one of those things where this could sound like a salty comment, and it's not a salty comment. But every time somebody suggests a show with trans people to me, I'm like, okay, so this is gonna be like a nice big cast of trans women, right? So when somebody suggests a show with trans people to me, and they're like, oh, so there's a trans male character, I'm like, yes. Give me.
My gosh, you're so right. Like, most of the examples, even in Disclosure, were trans women. So... And I don't know if they talked...
And there's plenty of bad reasons for that. Like, it's not a purely, like, one thing is good and one thing is bad.
Yeah. I mean, the big one
But-
is like Mex from the L Word, which I haven't seen, but I'm sure you could wax poetic about that. I don't remember them talking about like non-binary people a ton in Disclosure either.
They mentioned that there have been non-binary characters, but they didn't talk a lot about it.
Yeah.
But I also not sure that that's also hard because like a lot of the vaguely trans characters that are obviously making fun of trans people, you could label as non-binary because they have this like mix, but the mix isn't about being non-binary, it's about shitting on trans people.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like sort of a hard thing to talk about because you know that the framework of the pieces you're looking at is a binary one.
Like all the quote-unquote characters you could call like gender nonconforming or non-binary, they only exist for making gender nonconforming people a joke. So
Yeah.
what's the point of, psychoanalyzing that,
Yeah. And it's like, I can think of like, characters that were explicitly trans women or trans men that were not good characters. I can't think of any specific non-binary character that was made besides by somebody trying to represent non-binary people, and maybe that's just a personal failing, but I can't think of anything where it's like, this is a non-binary character, ha ha ha.
Yeah, have you ever seen Androgynous Pat?
No, I don't think I want to.
This is actually something they talk about in Work in Progress as a very interesting way of like talking about trans representation in media within a show that is good trans representation in media. So again,
Weird.
Watch Disclosure and watch Work in Progress. But Androgynous Pat was this SNL character in like the 80s or 90s or something, played by Julia Sweeney, and the whole joke of the character is it was like Julia Sweeney, who is a relatively like large woman, dressed up as this character who like wore khakis and like a work shirt, and the joke was always like, you don't know Pat's gender because it could be like Patrick or Patricia, and anytime someone tried to address Pat's gender, they'd just be like, oh, blah blah blah, and they talked with this really like androgynous sounding voice, and that was like the whole joke, like you didn't get the gender, which of course was like
this is one of those things where I'm like, that's super problematic, but if I watch that, I'd probably be like, mood
again.
Pat.
Yeah, this comes up again and again where like it could have been good for some people, but it was mostly bad for gender nonconforming people of all genders.
It's definitely one of those things where like once you're forced to identify with the shitty characters, you're just like, well, you know what? I'll do it.
Yeah.
We're gonna take it and run with it.
Yeah, like all the people that were like made fun of and called Pat for years for like dressing androgynously, and how if you dressed androgynously, you were like the butt of a joke for decades because of fucking SNL or whatever show it was.
I really liked how they talked about like that trans people have a really, really good sensor, like innate sensor for when you're laughing with them, when you're laughing at them. And I'm like, because the line is just so thin that we've had to like become so inherently keyed into it.
Yeah.
And watching a lot of the examples, it was sort of like it was definitely like sort of hard, even like looking at it and clearly like saying like that's a bad one and that's a good one. That one's on my side and that one isn't, to like figure out what was necessarily different about them.
Yeah, it's like a way of protecting ourselves, in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. That is an important distinction to make.
I think some of the better ones from the past, and I say better, not good, it was definitely like that. the joke was kind of just like, oh, she's normal, and like everybody else was alarmed and she was fine, and I'm like, yeah, that's like the joke is like that these people are so thrown off and not that she's weird, you know, or at least like I think that's like part of the angle that makes it less uncomfortable.
Yeah, I get that.
And I think you see that a lot with like sort of the more cautious takes on social issues, where if they do it the way that the joke is structured is like, yeah, this is an uncomfortable thing, but we should be making fun of the fact that we're all uncomfortable with this and not like making out like that is a bad thing. And I think that gets applied to other characteristics.
Do you have like an example of that that you can recall?
I'm trying to think of something like a specific piece of media, and I'm having a hard time.
Yeah, like I get what you're trying to say, but I can't think of a good example. Perhaps like a bad example of that would be like How I Met Your Mother. No, actually, that's just a bad thing. That's just a bad example in general.
For everything.
But like that was one of the jokes, or like, you know, one of Ted's greatest fears is that, you know, a woman that he's dating walks into the guy's bathroom and is like, oh yeah, I'm a man, and goes to the urinal, you know.
Which is like, what person has ever done
what
that?
What universe are you living in? Where a like, fully, like, you know, in a dress passing woman just busts into the guy's room, whips out her dick.
Power move, though.
I mean, power move for sure. I strive to be that powerful, but I'm not gonna do that. Christ. Yeah. Anything else from your notes? If not, we can kind of end on like a happy note.
Yeah, we can end on a good happy
note.
Once.
For once. Oh, thank goodness.
We're doing it. We're following in the footsteps of the documentary.
Aren't you glad we're not talking about electoral politics?
Love that.
So what are your favorite examples of trans people in media, Danny? Or queer people, I don't know.
I haven't watched anything that's come out in the past 4 years.
Yeah, I'm very bad at TV shows.
It's my problem.
You know, have you ever... Recently, I'm seeing a lot more representation of not only trans people, but of people who don't watch shows and they don't have a list, you know? Like, I'm seeing memes in the past couple weeks where it's like, oh, you should watch this show. Oh, great, I had it to the list. And there is no list. I just, you know, which makes me so happy and seen as someone who has no list.
I think part of my problem is just like the type of TV that I watch doesn't tend to be the first to get queer characters.
Sure.
Or gets them in really weird ways. So like fantasy sci-fi, you get non-binary characters, but it's because you get like a robot, you know?
Oh yeah, like the human characters and then like the non-binary alien or robot.
Yeah,
which
is not inherently bad. It makes sense, but maybe also humans can be non-binary.
Yeah, let's not other non-binary people by making them the aliens. It's literally the aliens.
It's like one of those scale things, and it's also one of those things, like, or one of those balance things where this wouldn't be bad if also.
Yeah.
But it's also one of those things where it's like, this is one of those things that's like a logical choice that does not pan out well. Like the disclosure arguments, we don't want to validate the person freaking out, but in good writing, you want to make a balanced argument. Like, I think it's one of those things where, like, it definitely makes a lot of sense to be like, oh, when we look at this culture that's different, they will think about gender differently, and so why not have a character that's, like, showing that, like, really specifically showing that. But also, humans can be non-binary.
Yeah, I'd rather have a non-binary character at all than not, but I'd love to see the next step, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. She-Ra. I don't think it explicitly has trans characters, but a lot of people are headcanoning that Bow is trans, and it has a non-binary character who is like a shape-shifting alien. Not alien, but lizard person, but still, they're funny and cool.
You know what? That's my gender goal.
Yeah, I mean, again, you get those things where it's like non-binary alien lizard shapeshifter mood.
I mean, yeah, it's like, I mean, and it's like you do feel like an alien, so why the fuck wouldn't you represent me like that?
Honestly, you're right. Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like an alien all the time, so.
Lizard person.
Mm-hmm.
We stand.
We stand. The lizard person from She-Ra. And I again recommend Work in Progress. Pose for its black trans characters and black trans writers. We just need to put more black trans people in like the writer's room in all positions of power.
Yeah.
And more than just for TV shows, if you know what I mean. Wink, wink. Wink, wink. I also wanted to mention, and this is totally left field, but as we're closing out the episode, all of that said, sorry, this transition is not going well.
Okay.
But we're gonna close out.
But mine is.
Wow.
Woo.
Oh, but come back next week for more, or come back in 2 weeks for more sick trans jokes. More of that. Great discussion on disclosure and trans people in media. I'm glad we had this talk. I do want to point out that we are living in tumultuous times, and we can't not address the tragedy going on in Beirut right now. With this episode, we are going to include some links to donate to people that are suffering after the explosion in Beirut. I specifically want to highlight charities that are donating to LGBTQ and trans and not-binary folks in that area, because as we all know from our, LGBTQ criminalization episode, that wherever there's suffering, it's happening worse for trans people, especially with regards to housing and medical care, which is rough right now in Lebanon. So we encourage you to donate to like the Lebanese Food Bank, Lebanese Red Cross, and also the couple of other charities and GoFundMes that we're going to put in the episode description, because if we stick together, we can make it through any tough times. And if you have a little extra money, throw it towards there, because Lord, do they need it.
Yeah. And our links are most easily found at our website, which is rule63podcast.com.
Darn right. You can find
/resources.
Yeah, it's /resources. You did a really good job with the website, Danny. Yay, of course. Yeah, you can go to rule63podcast.com to find all the resources mentioned today in this episode, as well as all our social media. We are on everything: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, posting about new episodes. You can, if you really like this episode, follow us on Spotify and subscribe, and give us a 5-star review on iTunes. And very importantly, if you like this, please share it with a friend. And also, if you really, really liked our show, you can become a Patreon supporter at, Rule 63 on Patreon. All those links, again, are in the website and description and all of that. Anything else, Danny?
I think we're good.
Okay. You can tweet at us. Oh, how about this? Tweet at us with your favorite shows with trans characters. Engagement.
At the Rule 63 pod ?
It's in the website.
Maybe?
Yay.
It's on the website. Twitter wouldn't let me have a normal handle.
Nope. Because why would it? Okay. Thanks for listening.